There's a kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep. You feel it on the days you do everything right and still feel like the world looks straight through you. You show up, you try, you stay positive, the way they told you to, and reality just shrugs. If you've ever stood in that quiet, watching certain people bend the whole room toward them while you fight just to be noticed, then you already know the feeling I'm naming. Here's what took me years to understand. The problem was never your effort. It was the field you were broadcasting from, the signal underneath your thoughts that quietly decides what reaches you and what slips past. You can repeat affirmations all day. If that signal stays the same, nothing moves. Tonight, we change that signal. Not with wishful thinking, with something older and far more precise. And by the end, the question won't be how to make reality notice you. It'll be why you ever believed it could look away. Let's start with a word that gets thrown around far too easily. Energy. People say it like it's a mood, a vibe, something you have on good days and lose on bad ones. But strip away the soft language and look at what's underneath, and you find something stranger and more grounded than any motivational poster ever admits. Everything around you and everything that is you is movement. The chair holding your weight feels solid, yet at the smallest scale, it's almost entirely empty space, humming with particles that flicker in and out of being. Your own body, the one that feels so fixed, so heavy with whatever you carried into this room, is mostly vibration, wearing the costume of matter. You are not a thing, sitting inside a world of things. You are a pattern of motion inside a larger pattern of motion. And patterns, unlike objects, can change. This is where it starts to get interesting, because if you are a pattern, then the question is no longer what you are. The question is what you keep repeating. Think about the rhythm of an ordinary day. You wake, and before your feet touch the floor, a familiar set of thoughts is already running. The same low worry, the same rehearsed disappointment, the same quiet narration that tells you who you are and what you should expect. You don't choose it in the morning, it chooses you. It runs because it ran yesterday and the day before, and for so many days before, that the groove is worn deep. Neuroscience has a plain way of describing this. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every time a thought travels a certain path, that path gets a little easier to travel again. Repeat it enough, and it stops being a thought you have and becomes a thought that has you. The brain, efficient as it is, builds a highway where you once made a footpath. And then it sends almost everything down that highway, automatically, because automatic is cheaper than awake. So here is the uncomfortable part. Most people are not living their lives. They are reliving a single version of themselves on a loop and calling it a personality. Sit with that for a moment, because it explains something you've probably felt without words. The sense that no matter what you try, you keep ending up in the same emotional place. New job, same dread. New relationship, same ache. New city, same loneliness following you like it paid for the ticket. It isn't bad luck. It's a frequency. You carry the inner weather with you, and the weather shapes what grows. Now, hold this next idea gently, because it's the hinge. Everything turns on. The state you live in most often is the state you broadcast most strongly. Not the words you say. Not the goals you write down on the 1st of January. The actual emotional tone you marinate in, hour after hour. The one running beneath the surface while you go about your business. That tone is your real signal. That is the field you're transmitting into the world, whether you ever meant to or not. And a field is not passive. A magnet doesn't beg the iron to come closer. It doesn't strain or perform or post about how much it wants the iron. It simply holds its nature completely, and the space around it bends. The iron moves because the field is real, not because the magnet asked nicely. Most of us were taught the opposite. We were taught to chase, to reach, to grip, to want so hard that wanting becomes a kind of pushing. And pushing, strangely, broadcasts the one thing that repels what you're after. It broadcasts lack, the constant low signal of not enough, not yet, not me. Reality, reading that signal faithfully, hands you more of exactly what you're transmitting. More waiting, more almost, more proof that you were right to brace yourself. You can see now why affirmations alone so often fail. You stand at the mirror and say, I am abundant, I am magnetic, I am worthy. While the field underneath hums a completely different note, the words go up, the signal stays down, and the field always wins because the field is what's true about you in that moment, and the words are only what you wish were true. So the work was never to say better sentences. The work is to change the note you're humming when you're not trying to change anything at all. That's where we're going. Not toward more effort, toward a different state. And the strange thing about state is that once it shifts, you don't have to chase a single thing. You become the kind of field certain things can no longer pass by. So if the field is the thing that matters, we have to ask the harder question. Where does the field come from? What actually sets the note you're humming all day without trying? The answer lives in a place most people never look, not in your thoughts, underneath them, in the body. We've been told the mind runs the show, that if you can just think your way into the right belief, everything downstream will follow. But anyone who has tried to think themselves out of an old fear knows how that goes. You can decide with full conviction that you are safe, that you are enough, that this time will be different. And then a familiar feeling rises in your chest, heavy and certain, and quietly overrules every word you just told yourself. The thought says one thing, the body says another, and the body is louder because the body got there first. Here's what's happening underneath. Every emotion you feel is also a chemistry, a specific cocktail released into your blood, washing through every cell, telling your body how to feel before your mind has finished explaining why. Feel that emotion often enough, and something subtle happens. Your cells begin to expect it. They tune themselves to it. They start, in a strange way, to crave it, the same way a body learns to crave anything it's been given on a schedule. This is why a person can be miserable in a situation and still not leave it. The mind wants freedom. The body wants the familiar. And the familiar, even when it hurts, feels like home. Because home is simply what you felt the most. We don't move toward what's good for us. We move toward what's known. And for many people, what's known is a low, grinding state they've mistaken for their personality, when really it's just a chemistry they've been refilling every day for years. Sit with how heavy that is, because it explains the gap between the life you can clearly imagine and the life you keep actually living. You're not failing to want it. You're being pulled gently and constantly back toward the emotional set point your body has memorized. You imagine the new life from inside the chemistry of the old one, and from inside that chemistry, the new life never quite feels real. It feels like a nice idea happening to someone else. So the broadcast continues. Not because you're weak, because you're consistent. You are faithfully, beautifully consistent with a version of yourself you outgrew a long time ago. Now here is where it turns, and I want you to feel this rather than just hear it. If a state can be learned, a state can be unlearned. If the body memorized one emotional home, it can be taught another. The cells that learn to expect the old chemistry can learn to expect a new one. It takes repetition, yes, but not the repetition of words, the repetition of feeling. This is the part that sounds almost too simple, which is exactly why people skip past it and stay stuck. To change your field, you have to feel the state of the thing you want before it arrives. not picture it. Feel it in the body as a present fact. The quiet steadiness of someone who already has what they're reaching for. The warmth of being chosen when nobody has chosen you yet. The grounded ease of enough while the bank says otherwise. It feels like lying at first. Your mind protests because nothing in your circumstances confirms it. But you're not lying to reality. You're instructing your body. You're giving your cells a new cocktail to memorize, a new home to recognize, a new note to hum when you're not paying attention. And the field, remember, is built from that note. There's an old idea, older than any laboratory, that the universe doesn't respond to what you ask for. It responds to what you become. Asking keeps the thing at a distance, out there, separate from you, something to be granted later. Becoming collapses the distance. You stop transmitting the request and start transmitting the having, and a field that hums having does not chase. It draws. This is slow work, and I won't pretend otherwise. The old chemistry will fight for its place. There will be mornings. The familiar weight returns before your eyes are even open, insisting nothing has changed. That morning is not failure. That morning is the old self asking to be fed. And for the first time, you get to decide whether to refill the prescription or to let it go unanswered and feel, on purpose, the state of who you're becoming instead. Do that enough times, and something quietly irreversible happens. The new note stops being an effort. It becomes the resting tone, and reality begins to organize itself around a person you're only just starting to meet. There's a piece of this that science still argues about, and I want to walk into it carefully because it's easy to overstate and easy to dismiss, and the truth sits in the uncomfortable middle. In the strange world of the very small, experiments kept turning up something that nobody asked for. When researchers studied particles of light and matter, they found that these particles behave differently depending on whether they were being observed. Unobserved, a particle moved like a wave of pure possibility, everywhere at once, undecided. Watched, it settled. It chose a single position, a single reality, as if the act of looking had pulled it out of the cloud of maybes and into one definite fact. Now, I'm not going to tell you this means your mind rearranges the furniture by staring at it. The honest scientists don't claim that, and neither will I. What happens with particles in a sealed laboratory is not a manual for manifesting a parking space. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something, but strip the experiment down to its bare astonishment, and you're left with a question that won't quite go away. Observation participates. The observer is not standing safely outside the system, taking neutral notes. The observer is woven in. At the deepest level we can measure, the watcher and the watched are part of one event. And that single fact, even held conservatively, cracks open the old story we were raised on. The story that says reality is a finished thing out there, complete without you, and you're just a spectator who wandered in late. You are not a spectator. Whatever else is true, you are a participant. And the question becomes not whether you affect your reality, but how and through what. Step back up out of the lab and into ordinary life, and you can see the same principle operating in plain sight. No physics required. Attention is the most underrated force you carry. What you observe, you amplify. Not magically, practically. The thing you keep your eyes on grows louder in your experience because attention decides what your mind treats as real and important. Two people walk through the same day. One notices every closed door, every slight, every reason the world is against them, and by evening they have assembled a thorough, evidence-rich case for despair. The other, walking the same street, notices the openings, the small grace, the unexpected yes. Same world, different reality. Not because one is lying, but because attention is a kind of observation. And what you observe, you call forward, so you are, in a real and daily sense, collapsing your own possibility cloud. Every moment, the field of what could happen narrows into what does, and your attention is one of the hands doing the narrowing. The trouble is, most people aim that hand backward. They observe their wounds, rehearse their lack, study their disappointments like scripture, and reality, faithful participant that it is, hands back exactly the world they keep insisting on seeing. This is why the magnetic field we're building can't be made of wanting. Wanting points your attention at absence. It says, look, here is the hole, here is what's missing, here's the space where the thing should be and isn't. And so, you collapse, again and again, the reality of missing. You become an expert observer of your own lack, and the universe promotes you for your diligence. The shift is almost embarrassingly simple to state and a lifetime's work to live. Stop observing the absence. Start observing from the having. Move your attention off the empty space and onto the quiet, present reality of the state you're cultivating. Not staring at the locked door, but feeling in your body, like someone for whom doors tend to open. That is observation pointed in a generative direction. That is you participating on purpose instead of by accident. And here's the part that should give you a strange kind of hope. You've been doing this your whole life. You are already a master of it. You've just been practicing in the dark, collapsing the same tired reality so consistently that it looked like fate. It was never fate. It was a skill used unconsciously. Which means the very power that built the cage is the power that opens it. Nothing new has to be installed in you. The instrument was always there. You only have to turn it around and aim it, for once, at what you actually want to call into being. Let's talk about the thing that quietly sabotages almost everyone who tries this, because it isn't doubt. Doubt is honest, and honesty you can work with. The real saboteur is far sneakier. It's urgency. You decide to change your field, and within days, a clock starts ticking inside you. Is it working yet? Has anything shifted? You check your life the way you'd check a phone for a message that hasn't come. Refreshing, and every time it isn't there, the checking itself broadcasts the old signal. Because urgency is just lack wearing a busier outfit. The frantic question when is the field of someone who does not believe it's already done, and a field that doesn't believe cannot draw. This is the paradox at the center of everything we're saying, and it's worth slowing down for. You have to want it enough to change, and release it enough to let it come. Grip too tight, and you transmit need. Let go entirely, and you stop transmitting at all. The state we're after lives in the narrow, beautiful space between. The calm of someone who knows, not hopes. Knows. The way you know the sun will rise, so completely that you don't stand at the window demanding the dawn. You just sleep and trust and wake to find it already there. That kind of knowing has a texture, and you felt it before in small ways. The ease of walking into a room where you genuinely belong. The quiet of a friendship so settled you don't have to perform it. There's no straining in those moments, no broadcasting of want, and so things flow. People feel drawn to you precisely on the days you needed nothing from them. Have you noticed that? The job arrives when you stop being desperate for it. The love shows up the season you finally made peace with your own company. It looks like cruel irony. It's actually the field doing exactly what fields do. The moment you stopped transmitting lack, the iron was free to move. I want to pause here and ask something of you, because this is a moment worth marking, not just hearing. If something in this is landing, if you can feel even a flicker of that knowing underneath your usual urgency, leave a comment with 4 simple words. I am already enough. That's it. I am already enough. Write it not as a wish, but as a quiet fact you're choosing to remember. Something happens when you say it out loud, into the open. where it stops being a thought trapped in your head and becomes a signal you've actually transmitted. And when you scroll later and see hundreds of other people who wrote the same 4 words, you'll feel something you don't expect. You'll feel less alone in the becoming. So go ahead. I am already enough. Then come back, because the next layer is the one most people never reach. Because here's what's underneath the urgency, the thing that actually drives all the refreshing and checking and straining. It's a quiet belief that you are not the kind of person good things happen to. That magnetism is a quality other people were born with, and you're out here trying to fake a frequency that was never yours. And that belief, more than any technique, is the real ceiling. You can master every method in the world and still stay exactly where you are, if underneath it all you're convinced the methods work for others, but not for you. So before we go further, we have to touch that belief directly, because no field built on top of it will hold. The steadiness we're after isn't a performance laid over a wound. It has to go all the way down. And that means the next thing we look at isn't a technique at all. It's the oldest story you tell about yourself, the one running so deep you stopped hearing it as a story and started mistaking it for the truth. That story is the real field, and it's the one we're about to change. Every person carries a story about themselves they did not consciously write. It was assembled piece by piece, long before you had any say in it. A look from a parent that lingered a second too long. A moment you reached for something and were told, gently or not, that it wasn't for you. A season where love came with conditions, and you learned, without anyone saying it aloud, what you'd have to be to deserve it. None of it arrived as a sentence. It arrived as a feeling, and the feeling hardened into a frame. And now you see your whole life through it without ever noticing the frame is there. Carl Jung pointed at this with a line that has outlived him for good reason. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Read that slowly. The thing running you from underneath doesn't feel like a program. It feels like reality. It feels like simply the way things are, the way they've always been, the way they'll presumably always be. That's the genius and the cruelty of it. The deepest story never announces itself as a story. It wears the mask of plain truth, and so a person spends decades trying to change their life on the surface, while the frame underneath stays untouched. They get the better job, and within a year they feel the same quiet smallness they always felt, because the frame that says, "I don't quite belong," came along for the ride and recolored the new circumstance to match. They find the love they longed for, and slowly, almost artfully, arrange to feel the same old loneliness inside it, because the frame that says, "I'm too much" or "not enough" has to be proven right. The unconscious is loyal above all to its own story. It would rather be right about your unworthiness than happy in your worth. This is the real reason the field stays stuck, not a lack of desire, not a lack of effort. A buried allegiance to an old identity that has run things so long it feels like home. You cannot consistently broadcast a magnetism your deepest story says you don't deserve. The signal will sabotage itself, quietly, to stay faithful to the frame. You'll self-correct back to the familiar smallness the way a thermostat pulls a room back to its setting, and you'll call it bad luck, or proof, or just the way you are. So the work, the real work, is not to paint a brighter story over the old one. It's to go down to the frame itself and see it, finally, as a frame. Because the moment you can see the story as a story, something loosens. You stop being the character trapped inside it and become, for the first time, the one holding it in your hands. And what you can hold, you can question. What you can question, you can set down. Here is the gentle, almost unbearable truth at the bottom of this. The story was never the truth about you. It was the truth about what happened to you. Those are not the same thing. Though they fused so early, you've spent your life mistaking one for the other. What happened to you taught you to expect less, to brace, to keep your reach modest and your hope quiet. But that was a lesson, not a law. And lessons learned can be unlearned by someone willing to feel the discomfort of believing something new before the evidence arrives. This is where it connects back to everything we've built. The state you practice, the having you feel before it comes, the attention you aim at the openings instead of the locked doors. None of it can take root in soil that says you're not the kind of person these things happen to. So the new state and the new story have to grow together. Each time you feel the steadiness of enough, you're not just changing your chemistry. You're quietly contradicting the oldest frame, casting a vote for a different self, gathering evidence the old story swore you'd never find. Do it long enough, and the frame begins to lose its grip. Not in a dramatic breakthrough, though those happen. More often it fades the way a sound you stopped noticing fades, until one ordinary day you realize you've been moving through the world without it. You reach for something and don't flinch. You receive something good and don't immediately wait for it to be taken back. The fate you used to call your life turns out to have been a story all along. And a story, once seen, can finally be rewritten. I want to step out of the deep water for just a second because something occurred to me and it feels dishonest not to say it. If you've made it this far, you are not who I was worried about. You're not the person looking for a quick trick to get rich by Friday. You're someone who's lived enough to know that the real things are quiet and slow and earned from the inside. You've probably been through a season, maybe more than one, that took something from you, and instead of going numb, you got curious. That's rare. The people still listening at this depth, well into a long conversation about consciousness and identity and the field you broadcast, are a particular kind of person. The kind who suspects there's more and refuses to stop reaching for it. I don't take that lightly. I'm glad you're here. And that very quality, the refusal to go numb, is the thing I want to come back to. Because it's the engine of everything we've been building. Because here's what the old story counts on. It counts on you eventually deciding it's too late, that the frame is too old, the groove too deep, the chemistry too set. It whispers that people don't really change, that you are who you are by now, that the becoming we've been describing is for the young, or the lucky, or the already blessed. And the moment you believe that whisper, the field locks. Not because change became impossible, but because you stopped transmitting the one signal that makes it possible, the signal that says, I am not finished. That phrase deserves a home in you. I am not finished. The brain that built the highways can build new ones, at any age, in any season. Neuroplasticity doesn't check your birthday. The cells that memorized one emotional home can be taught another in your 50s, your 60s, your 80s, because the mechanism never expires. It only goes unused. Every story about being too set in your ways is the old frame defending itself with a lie dressed up as wisdom. And the proof is in the people who turned late and became magnetic in ways their younger selves never managed. You've met them. The person who, after everything, walks into a room carrying a stillness that pulls the whole place toward them. They aren't louder than they were at 25. They're quieter, but the quiet has weight now. It's the quiet of someone who stopped performing their worth and simply settled into it. And that settling, that complete inhabiting of themselves, is the most magnetic thing a human being can do. Reality leans toward a person who has stopped arguing with their own existence. That's the field we're after, not the frantic charisma of someone trying to be seen, the grounded gravity of someone who no longer needs to be and is therefore, finally, impossible to ignore. So, the question that's been humming under this whole conversation comes due. Not whether you can change. You can. The mechanism is intact, waiting, indifferent to how long it's been idle. The question is whether you'll keep feeding the old story that says it's too late for you, or whether you'll start, today, in some small and unglamorous way, to transmit the truth instead, that you are still here, still reaching, still, against everything, becoming. And becoming has a direction now. Everything we've laid down, the state, the chemistry, the attention, the story, all of it has been pointing somewhere, toward a single shift that holds the rest together. Let's name it. So, let's gather what we've carried here. You came in tired, maybe, of doing everything right and feeling unseen, and what we found underneath that tiredness was not a flaw in your effort. It was a field, a signal humming beneath your thoughts, built from the state you live in. The chemistry your body memorized, the attention you aim without thinking, and the oldest story you ever learned to tell about yourself. That field has been broadcasting all along, faithfully, whether you meant it to or not. And the shift, the real one, was never about wanting harder. It was about becoming so complete in the state of the thing you long for that you stop transmitting the ache of its absence and start transmitting the quiet fact of its presence. You stop asking reality to notice you. You become a field reality cannot pass by, not because you chased it down, because you finally stopped running and let your own gravity do what gravity does. That's the whole turn. The magnet never begged the iron. It just became, fully, what it was. And the space around it bent. If something in this has opened a door you want to walk further through, I've gathered these ideas, the science and the practice, and the deeper work of changing your field into something called Awaken Your Quantum Shift. It's a quiet companion for the becoming, for the nights the old story comes, asking to be fed, and you want a hand to hold while you choose differently. The link rests in the first comment, pinned at the top. It'll be there if and when the moment feels like yours. No rush. The field doesn't respond to urgency, remember, only to readiness. Now sit with this last thing, and then I'll let the quiet have you. You spent so long believing you had to earn your way into being noticed, that if you just did enough, became enough, proved enough, reality might finally turn its face toward you. But the iron never moved because the magnet was worthy. It moved because the magnet stopped doubting it was a magnet. If this reached something in you, follow along, because we go to this depth often, and the next layer is always waiting. Share it with 5 people who've been quietly reaching for more, the ones who suspect there's something underneath the surface they haven't touched yet.